I'm Hunter Thompson, and welcome to the Cash Flow Connections Real Estate Podcast. How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the show, and welcome back to another episode. Today, we have Rich and Kathy Fettke, who just launched their new book, Scaling Smart. Holy crap, I'm super excited. Kathy's been on the show before. Rich has been on the show before. They've been featured on basically every major publication that you can name and a lot you can't name. I actually see in the background of Rich's view here, for those that are listening just on audio, you've got an Inc. 5000 award, which is amazing, which is a perfect tie into this topic, which is that we want to help you grow a business. First of all, let me start out with a unique question. I've written a book, and what I have found, so we'll start to tease people a little bit, but one of the crazy things about writing a book is as soon as you write a book, you like go to sleep and then you wake up and you're like, oh, I should have put that in there. So let me just start with what's not in there, right? Is there any tidbit that you can think of that you were like, you know what, we could have gone with this angle or we didn't talk about that, and then we'll talk about the book itself.
I'm going to actually the opposite experience for me. When I wrote my first book, Extreme Success, 20 years ago, I put everything I had into that book and overwrote it. And Kathy's heard me say several times, I should have made that 3 books to simplify and focus the message. So we carry that forward with Scaling Smart and saying, what are the most important things to get in here? And the way we did that, Kathy and I sat down at a table with Post-it notes, and we took a half hour to write down all our biggest and best lessons from growing our company, RealWealth, over the past 21 years. And then we combined those together, and that is what created our table of contents. So it came right kind of from the heart and from the gut as far as what's worked for us. And then we interviewed a lot of business experts on what's worked for them.
That's awesome. And maybe that's the difference between me. I've only written 1 book, so I haven't gotten to learn that lesson and do the second one the right yet. You guys have both interviewed some incredible people. What were some of those key takeaways that maybe didn't come from the way you originally thought about saying it, but definitely from great mentors that have helped you over the years, and also people you've been able to interview on your various shows?
Well, for me, it was Jillian Hellman of Realty Mogul. She if you know, she created a crowdfunding platform very early on. She was like in her early 20s, and it really took off. She got funded very early on. And so many people think, wow, if I could just get funded. Even our daughter and our future son-in-law, at least that's what we're calling him, has said, should we get a loan? And it's like, absolutely not. When you're bootstrapping and you're in a service industry that mostly sales now, that's just going into debt. And so to hear somebody who's become as huge as Jillian, and to hear her story that it was actually not the best thing for her to have so much money in the beginning, because then she brought in really expensive people in the executive suite, and they didn't pull their weight based on the salary. Sometimes when you're doing a startup, it's the scrappiness that gets it through the toughest times of a startup. So that was like, oh, wow, okay, I can relate to that. That was one part. And then the second part was, so basically they ran out of money because they spent all the money on these expensive people and it didn't pan out. So they went back to scrappy. But then when the turning point happened was when they went and were able to earn enough money to hire specialists, people who are just that the main thing they do and what they do very well and have for a long time is the job you need. And so often when we're starting a business, we just grab anyone. Are you available? You grab family, friends, and hope that maybe you can train them or that they'll figure it out. And that's how you start a company. It's also a very quick way to implode.
Yeah, 100%. I don't have any experience with that. I always was more inclined to business models that didn't require this massive timeline of being not profitable, right? Maybe I was thinking too small or whatever. You can certainly make that case, but in growing the business the way that I have, you're stepping up in talent in a very natural way that makes a lot of sense. And you know what? I'll ask you this right now. This is a little bit of a technical question, but like, there's a lot of books out there that talk about things like this visionary integrator concept or something similar to that. I want to get your perspective on that, but I got to at least poison the well just a little bit. I have found that most businesses don't generate enough revenue or profit to have that discussion. And so when they start to hear those kinds of concepts, they try to apply it at their budget and it doesn't make sense at all. Like, for example, if you tried to hire a COO for $5,000 a month, you're going to think that COOs aren't real or can't pull their weight. You know what I mean? Which is the other side of that spectrum from what Jillian Hellman was talking about. What comes to mind when you think about that and budget and revenue being an important part of like this concept of scaling?
I mean, a lot of times, like with Kathy and me, she's definitely more in the visionary role and I'm more in the integrator role. So it was easy. We didn't have to, pay out that extra salary, especially in the beginning where I barely got any salary in the beginning days. But I think there's usually someone on your team, unless you're a solopreneur, then you don't have a business. You don't have a company. You have a business, but you don't have a company and you're not creating any time freedom for yourself. So it's often looking at who's on your team, what's your role, what are you great at, what are your greatest strengths, and what do you bring to the company, and then looking at who on your team is currently fulfilling that integrator role. Who is the COO? And if they're not in that, they don't have that title, but still, who is that person on your team? Maybe it's your executive assistant who's keeping you organized and tracking things and all. But yeah, then eventually, once you get to a certain profitability and revenue, then you can look at hiring that. And there are outsourced integrators that you can hire. There's websites and places where you can hire someone on a part-term basis, on a fractional basis, that has those skills to come in and lead meetings and lead quarterly connection meetings and annual planning meetings and all that.
Cool. Okay, one more kind of statement about why I was excited to do this interview, and then we'll go back, talk about your background, the businesses you've grown, and some of the lessons you've learned, many of the stories I'm sure you put into your new book. So not long ago, I saw this business speaker speak, and he talked about the Inc. 5000 list. And he revealed, I don't remember the exact data point, but it's basically like, hey, look, running a business is difficult. As we all know, most businesses fail in the first 10 years, like overwhelming majority. It actually ends up being that more businesses on the Inc. 5000 list fail in the first 10 years than those not on the Inc. 5000 list.
Wow.
Meaning that it's harder to scale than it is to not. Do you know what I mean? Like you trying to go faster and bigger makes it more difficult for you to achieve success. But I have been in a business that we're applying right now. I think we probably will make it this year, which is awesome. But I could have sat back and not wanted those extra clients, not helped those additional people, not gotten more employees, and probably had a more likely outcome of success. But I don't want to play small, which is why I want to talk to you. So I'd love to hear about your background, growing businesses, doing hard stuff, and then the lessons you kind of put into the book, like I said.
That's super interesting about people on the Inc. 5000 because it is the list of fastest growing companies and it takes a lot to grow fast. And it just exactly what you said. If you're just focused on growing and not so much profitability, we see scaling as growing, but having your expenses not grow as quickly as your revenues, right? But too often over the years, our whole business model at RealWealth is working with other companies. We have over 77,000 members. We refer those members to companies that we trust who will help them find properties, renovate them, or maybe they're already new, have management in place, basically turnkey. And we've been doing this for 20 years. We have seen far too often situations where companies have grown too quickly and they grew themselves broke because as they grew, they would have to bring in more people, like you said, and they have to learn a whole new skill, which is being a leader and being a manager versus the thing that they started that they're good at. For example, when I first was on the radio in San Francisco with RealWealth, I talked about some of the properties we were buying all over the country and what kind of good deals we were getting. And suddenly our phones were ringing off the hook. Somebody in Australia heard, flew us out to Australia. Suddenly we had like 1,000 Australians throwing us money. So this one amazing team that we worked with in Cleveland, who had just been giving us and our friends and a few of our members some really good deals, suddenly had over 90 people on a wait list at all times for a property. And instead of just saying no, we're not, or slowing down, he wanted to serve all of them. A good guy, good heart, but he didn't have the systems. We talk about it in the book. Growing too fast is like trying to run a marathon in your 6th grade tennis shoes. You just can't. You're going to hurt yourself. You're going to get injured. And especially if you don't really know how to run that marathon, if you're running it like a 6th grader. So that's how a lot of people grow. They don't know how to grow their systems with that kind of growth. So this poor guy literally went from being a multimillionaire to broke. And I felt extremely responsible because we were the ones that sent him all the leads, and people were desperate. They were banging on his door. They were showing up saying, I want a great property too. And he needed boundaries. I mean, Rich, what would you have done if you coached him at that time?
I would start with, for the sake of what? Why are you trying to grow so fast? Why are you trying to scale? That's the big question. It's the coaching question. For the sake of what? And so many people don't stop to ask themselves that question. They just get caught into this narrative of what we see on social media, what we see in books is like, I want to 10x my growth. And they see that 10x as 10xing this year or 10xing this quarter. And that's where it gets dangerous. And to realize, Kathy and I have 10x'd our business several times, but it's been over the last 21 years. So you really need to step back and say, okay, what is my growth plan here? How fast do I want to grow? And for the sake of what? And that's the key, because when you try to grow too fast, it just creates overwhelm for your team. It creates overwhelm for you. You start to break down in customer service and product delivery, all these things. So that's where you got to step back and just say, okay, for the sake of what, and what is sustainable growth? What is sustainable growth? And, we made the Inc. 5000 list. That trophy behind me is one of 3. So we got it 3 years in a row.
Good for you.
And we were starting to experience that overwhelm of team breaking down, frustration, communication breakdown. And so after the 3rd year, we had our annual planning meeting and we just looked at it and we said, okay, this year is not about growth. This year is not about scaling. This year is about getting better. It's about better serving our members, better serving our investors, better communicating as a team. And so we put our focus on that, and it alleviated so much overwhelm and all of that. And we grew 35% that year. So by focusing on quality over growth, I think that's a key.
Man, first of all, that's an incredible accomplishment. And you can hear just in my response to that, because I know what it takes to hit that list, right? And you can Google it, you can figure it out. But the point is, it's not easy. There's a lot of young, hungry killers in this game, and y'all are young, hungry killers yourself. But it's like, geez, to keep it going for year after year is really incredible. But you heard my response to that, good for you. And then I hear, but this year is about, retaining clients and making sure they have a good experience. There's a very different tone to that. And my response isn't as visceral. Well, I don't know how to respond to that. It's like, I don't know. Was that good? You tell me. It's all this question marks. So like, how do you, working with entrepreneurs, seeing that struggle where a lot of us want to be an entrepreneur and only would take the risk of an entrepreneurship route is if there was no ceiling, right? Because if we wanted to have predictability, we obviously could go and get a job. So how do you balance that? How do you kind of have those conversations and think internally as well as externally?
Take that one, Kathy?
Yeah, we wrote this book more as how can you have your business work for you rather than you work for your business? Because so often we leave another job or another profession or career or whatever, something else we're doing with this dream of entrepreneurship. And usually there's a reason. Maybe it's, I want control of my schedule, or I want to be able to have unlimited income streams, or whatever it is. And we come to it with a dream. And once you kind of get into the hard work of building a company, people forget that dream. And suddenly they are working for a worse boss, one who makes them work 24/7, not just 9 to 5, somebody who is controlling all hours of the day. If you talk to an entrepreneur, I mean, Rich and I just spoke at an event and I said, how many of you feel like you're in control of your business versus your business in control of you? And there was zero hand that went up in the air that felt like they had control of their business, which means that you're working, you've created a worse job for yourself. So the very first chapter, we're like, man, you better get clear on what it is you're trying to create, because building a business is so hard. You will get off track. And if you don't even know what your track is, if you don't even know where you're going, it's going to get real messy. So that first chapter is really the why. Why are you doing it? What's the ultimate goal? How is this company going to take you there? And once that's clarified, that will sort of create the identity of the company as well, which is part 2, what's your business about? And for example, RealWealth, I mean, look at Rich and I are both wearing hats. I just went hiking. Our whole business is called RealWealth. We're not talking about how many doors you have or, what's your net worth. You're not hearing that from us. We're asking, how's your real wealth? Like, what are you really doing that's bringing you joy? And hopefully your real estate has supported you in that effort versus, if someone comes up to me at an event and is like, how many doors do you have? The first thing I'll say is, why? Why didn't you ask me how much free time I have?
Yeah. Our good friend, mutual friend, Hunter Tarl Yarber, who's flipped over 650 homes, his mentor said something to him that now he shared with me that has stuck with me and is in the book. And it's design your business around your life. Don't design your life around your business. And it just hit home so much. It's so often we get sucked into that where you're trying to get to fit your life in around your business. All your focus is there. Whereas what you really want to do is say, what do I want my life to look like? And how can my business support that?
Totally. And I know that I can hear from some of the language you use, and offline you mentioned kind of the concept of a self-scaling or self-managing business. Essentially, self-scaling is kind of the rational conclusion of that. I'm a big fan of Strategic Coach and Dan Sullivan and those guys.
Yeah.
Let me talk to you about this. Is there talk in the book or just generally about this kind of transition around what tasks and mindset is required at different levels? Because when you think about designing a business around your life, that's what I have done. It took a long time. There was a time when I was just like, freaking do whatever you can, got
Yeah.
up 2 nickels to run together, 2 people, 1 person, no skills, like, hey, plenty of time, no skills, right? Like that's how I started. So
Yep.
things are different now. How do you talk about like going from that starting point, which is where a lot of us start, to like running it up and getting into the 5 and 10 million range?
I'll start. For us, it was laying out our business structure, saying, okay, what's going on right now? And we created an organizational chart of our business to put the positions in, say, like, where are we right now? And when we looked at that chart, it was Rich, Kathy. Maybe we had Maggie, we had Nick over here, but it was mostly Rich and Kathy. And we stepped back and then we said, okay, in 3 years, what does this business look like? If we were to design this the way we want, let's create an org chart for that. And we laid it all out. And then we looked at, okay, this is the way the business structure will be. And then we looked at those positions and we said, what's our next hire? And we said, okay, this hire is going to be in Q4 of 2016. And then this hire is going to be in Q1 2017. We laid it all out. And then we pretty much stuck to our plan. And then we would slowly hire for those positions as the company continued to grow. So that was the start of it. But Kathy, I think you should talk about the whole leadership thing and empowering your leaders.
Yeah. So there's a big change that happens that oftentimes the entrepreneur isn't even aware of. And like I said, you go from, let's say you're a accountant and you leave your CPA firm to start your own, or you worked for a multifamily operator and now you're doing it yourself and you love underwriting multifamily and that's your thing. And as your company grows, as you have success, you need more and more people. And all of a sudden, you're going from doing the thing you love, which may be underwriting, it may be hunting for the deal, to now you got to manage these people. Totally different skill set, and one that most of us aren't trained to do unless you already are trained to do that. Maybe you had a management position elsewhere. But that is the tipping point. That's the change. And I remember, as an entrepreneur, I was a solo entrepreneur in my mind. Like I wanted to have my fingers in every little detail of the business to the point where I was still monitoring every email that went out, not trusting leaders. And so Rich helped me go to Strategic Coach and other masterminds like that to learn the next step in owning a business, which is to develop leaders within your company and empower them. And you don't empower a leader when you go around them. This was one of the hardest lessons for me as a visionary, to mentor someone else to basically replace me and my authority and not go around them. And I did for years. I'd be like, oh, I didn't like this way this was handled. So I'd go to the employee who did it instead of to the manager of that employee so that they could continue to learn how to grow. So for us, that was the biggest shift is, creating that org chart, like Rich said, and, all the different departments. There's usually marketing, sales, product, accounting, legal, and all of those divisions, tech would have somebody who's really good at managing that part of the company. And that's who you manage. They manage the rest of the people below them, basically, who report to them. And everyone in the company should have someone they report to, and not several people, one person. So everybody's got a bottom line responsibility, a number that they're responsible for hitting, and metrics, KPIs that they're every week we look at those. How are you doing on these goals that we all set together, and continue to empower the leaders. Today, just a few years after we really put these things in place, and I stopped being the bottleneck, when I stopped going around our leaders, we can truly say that we could walk away, we could go to Europe for several months, maybe a couple years, and things would run just as well as if not better today, because of the work we put in.
And it's possible, but it's freaking hard. And so when I love this idea, and at the same time, I do have these limiting beliefs in my own mind. Like, let me give an example. A lot of the listeners here are real estate entrepreneurs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I've seen the inside of a lot of real estate companies, and I run one myself. And so there's just not a lot of cash flow. And so it's difficult for me to the real estate element of these real estate businesses is incredibly scalable, right? And that's the angle there. The vehicle itself is a beautiful vehicle. It's passive. You can explode. You can grow a very large net worth, but it's hard to hire a lot of team members and really take time off in a real estate company, a traditional multifamily business. Maybe fix and flip is a little different. How do you talk about that? Because I know that cash flow is a critical piece. That's kind of the oil and gas on this whole conversation, at least from my view. What are your thoughts on that as it relates to real estate companies?
I mean, the first thing that came to mind is if you have a really clear buy box, and you're not finding anything that fits within that buy box, then you either have to dig harder, or you sit on the sidelines for a bit, or find another income stream. That's why, as you probably know, RealWealth wasn't doing any multifamily deals over the past few years, because it didn't fit our buy box. It was too risky. And believe me, I know risk. I've taken risky deals on, and it ends up being far more work. And oftentimes you're feeding it. This is what a lot of multifamily syndicators are learning right now, is it's not making them money. They are paying into these projects to keep them afloat. We know that really well. The bad projects we took in because we didn't follow our buy box, we didn't even have one really in the beginning, I've got projects I'm working on 10 years later for free, paying for attorneys, paying for, all of the things that we need to keep these going. So sometimes doing nothing is the better plan if it's not working, or just finding people that can dig deeper, negotiate harder. And what we're seeing some people do is kind of shifting their business model right now, and you don't want to shift your business model and do something you don't know how to do. Bring in someone who knows how to do it. But one of the huge opportunities right now is buying businesses. You have a massive generation of baby boomers who are retiring, and they don't want to just shut their doors, and their kids maybe aren't into it, don't want to take over the business. So there's a massive opportunity, and the underwriting is not that different than underwriting a multifamily property, which is also a business. So I wouldn't just turn and suddenly start buying businesses without someone on your team who knows how to do it. But right now, I agree with you. It's hard to find a multi-deal that pencils. That's why we're doing a build to rent syndication right now. We can make those numbers work. We found an opportunity where a lot of builders are challenged because of the high rates over the past few years. So we've been able to take over some distressed situations with builders. But multifamily, it just seems a little stuck right now. I agree with you.
Yeah, it's wild. And I love that. And by the way, we're seeing a massive tailwind to the buying existing businesses stuff. So as someone who helps people raise money, of course, what we raise money for now is only multifamily in Phoenix. But there's plenty of people that we've helped raise money for a wide variety of things. I can tell you that that interest in buying businesses is growing so much so, and I can announce this now, someone today signed a contract to come on as a coach just in the buying existing businesses stuff. And I'll be honest with you, I went into the conversation saying, all right, it's just, there's those similar, like I can figure this out. And they're like, well, what do you know about SBA financing? I'm like, nothing. They're like, that's like the whole game. I'm like, all right, you're hired. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's
Tell me
really
about
cool.
EBITDA multiples.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like it's similar enough. No, there's nuances, there's
It's
intricacies.
definitely different. Yeah.
But the cool thing is the multiples are wildly different as well. You can just go on a normal business broker website and find what we would call basically a 30 cap for a business. And maybe it's a nail salon or whatever, but there's a ton of opportunity there. And just like one last to kind of put the point on it, you will learn a lot about growing a business if you work in an industry where there's a lot more cash flow and there's a lot more logistics. This is the reason most of us stay away from this stuff, because it's easier to do real estate. It's a much more simplistic business model. But if you take things you learn from heavy logistics, manufacturing, operations, and then apply that same skill set to real estate, you have this massive explosion potential, especially if you've got these two on your team kind of guiding you through and helping you.
Really, you know, and having raisingcapital.com, how perfect, because that's your flywheel. You know, you focus on helping people raise capital, and yeah, you can spread into buying businesses without really veering off of your being out of your lane.
100%. Okay, I
That's
want to
cool.
talk real quick about the customer journey and the customer success element of this. And I love the way that you took your foot off the gas in your mind about growth. And I don't know where you put your foot, but you said, listen, our retention, our success stories need to be at the forefront of our business. And then guess what? It automatically started growing. I would love to hear about how you thought about that internally and like what buttons you pushed to bring that about.
I think it's just that big question. It's just a simple question, but a powerful one is, how can we better serve our members at Real Wealth? That was the big question. And then we masterminded that as a leadership team. We started to look at all the different ways. One thing that came out of that was, you know, these 15 different property teams that we refer to in all these different markets around the country, they were all doing things differently. So it was not apples to apples. Investment counselor would meet with one of our members, they'd talk about investing, and they'd say, well, you can invest here in Florida, or you can invest here in Dallas. And but they couldn't say, here's what to look for in the property. They could just talk about the basics. And so we pulled all our property teams together and we put on a free mastermind for them, a 2-day mastermind where we all got together. And since they're not really in competing markets, they were able to share best practices with each other. And we were able to get aligned around how can we have some standards around what a true turnkey property is. How much time left on the roof? How much time left on the water heater? What are the things that need to be done? Do you have to replace the windows after what certain point of time? What does property management look like? How much do you charge for that first month of putting a tenant in? Things like that. And we came up with a clear set of standards that everyone agreed to. There was some debate, a lot of heated debate, but everyone in the end agreed to these standards. And we were able to bring that to our members. And there was so much less confusion for how we serve our members, because then they were able to say, oh, I get it. I can compare this property to this property, knowing it's a very similar property. Now I can just kind of look at the numbers and the market without being confused about anything else. So that was just one way that came out of that. How can we better serve our members?
100%. I like that. And just like the simplicity, the result focus, getting clear on what you're going to help them with, as opposed to taking a broad approach. It just really helps streamline the process. And then, you know, you can quantify results a lot easier when they're clearly heading towards one direction, as opposed to having a more broad, hey, just help me generally speaking. I'd love to talk about your outlook now. Obviously, the nature of kind of business pillars is that they shouldn't change in changing economic climates. But we all know now that the Fed seems to be reducing rates. We're probably going to be entering a different climate over the next 12 months than we were in the previous 12. How do you think about that? Do you agree with that? And also, like, what's your outlook in terms of what it means to scale a business in 2025 versus 2023 or 2024?
I'll let the economics master handle that one.
Oh, thanks. You know, it's a very unusual time. Obviously, pandemic was unprecedented for us, and the shockwaves that we felt since have thrown off most of the charts that economists look at. And that's why there's been so much confusion out there. We are now going into a rate cutting cycle at a time when the job market is slowing down, but the growth is slowing down. We're kind of back to normal. And a lot of the intense job growth that we saw over the last few years was really just a return of jobs that were lost during the pandemic. So again, it skewed the numbers. So right now, the job market is kind of similar to pre-pandemic levels, and jobless claims are still really low. So overall, I think last time I checked, the GDP was around 3% for this quarter. That's a pretty robust economy, and not normally a time that the Fed would cut rates. So everything is a little backwards, and it's been backwards for years. Whenever we would see good news, it was bad news because, if there was job growth, oh no, that means inflation. They're going to keep hiking rates. And really over the last few years, the rate hiking seriously affected commercial real estate, not so much residential, because most residential property owners are on fixed rate debt, the majority. So they didn't feel any of these rate hikes in terms of that. In fact, they have the lowest payment to income in history. But the commercial market really felt it because rates adjusted ridiculously. If you have a rate adjustment on a $100,000 house, that's very different than a $100 million building, right? So these payments went up massively. And so looking forward, I'd love to say I have an answer, but nobody really knows because we've never been really in a situation that I know of where the Fed started cutting rates when we already had a pretty robust job market. It's just weird. So what does it mean normally when the Fed would cut rates? That means lots of stimulus. That means money's cheaper, and we would see more job growth. We would probably see a bit more inflation, even though the Fed's still trying to get down to their 2%, not totally there yet. So we're in a bit of an unknown place. But I can tell you from the 30 years that I've been in, almost 30 years that Rich and I have been investing, there's never been a time that anybody knew what was coming next. It's always been confusing. So all you can do is the best you can do, project the best you can. One of the biggest issues I've seen over the past decade is people kind of putting together projections as if there's only one way things could go. Mm-hmm. They're like, we're going to buy this and we're going to increase expenses this much and our rate is going to be this much and our exit cap is going to be this much. And at the end of the day, they were just guessing because none of us know what cap rates will be in 3 or 4 years. So you're guessing. So if you're guessing, then you should show several realities, several possible outcomes. What happens if rates go up? What happens if rates go down? What happens if rents go up? What happens if rents go down? A lot of people, I would bring this up to people a few years ago and say, well, what if rents come down? You're only projecting them going up. Oh, no, they'll only go up. We're in Austin. Well, guess what's happening in Austin? Rents are coming down because there's too much supply. So that would be my best advice to people in uncertain times, and uncertain times is always, we never know what the future holds. Make sure you've got several possible outcomes and backup plans for your plan. For example, our build to rent community that we're doing in San Antonio, first and foremost, we know that San Antonio was rated the fastest growing city in the country according to the Census Bureau. And there's a lot of reshoring, I should say, what are they calling it? Nearshoring, I think. In Mexico, they're just bringing it right over the border to San Antonio. So we see a lot of growth happening in that area. And with the build to rent model, I kind of like it because we have several outcomes. We can sell the whole build to rent community to an institutional investor in 5 years, or we can sell them one off to investors, or we can sell them one off to homeowners, or both, or we can just keep it and hold it as a rental. And if rents go down, we're still going to be okay because we got the land cheap enough. So we have all sorts of exit strategies that make me feel more comfortable going into an uncertain environment.
And hiring is a lot easier when there is an economic slowdown, right? So if you have a business plan that is viable in any economic climate, it is an amazing time to scoop up great talent when other people are retreating, letting people go, reducing hours, et cetera. And though I haven't yet read the book, I'm about to buy it right now. I can promise you that having quality talent and building great culture is a huge part of what it takes to scale smart. So keep your eyes out there. People bail when it's hard, but that is when the riches are made. And part of the riches being made is having a great team filled with people that are going to fight. And if you can hire great people when it's tough and they'll stick with it during the tough times, they will all be very grateful and excited about the skills they learned at that time and applying that to some really easy times when money is flowing. So this has been awesome. I'm super excited for you guys. I can't wait to read the book. Let us know, what's the best place people can go to learn about you, but also grab a copy?
For us, our site is realwealth.com. Pretty simple. It's got a whole bunch of educational resources. We've produced almost 1,000 free educational webinars now that you have access to. And we have investment counselors over there as well that can help you invest. And then for the book, Scaling Smart, it's on Amazon and everywhere where books are sold.
Cool. We will link to that in the show notes page. Kathy and Rich, thanks a ton.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.